All right, joining us, the reporter who did that interview, Sky News anchor and MS Now contributor Wilfred Frost. Good to see you, Wilfred. Dubai-based correspondent Inzamam Rashid at the Strait of Hormuz, MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone-Lopez, and former CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr. Barbara, good to have you as well. Let's start with Inzamam. Tell me what's happening on the Strait as of right now.
Well, Katie, it's been a much quieter day today on the water behind me. Still many ships standing, still around 1,000 of them. But the risk level here remains critical. Up above today as well, we've heard fighter jets in the early hours of this morning. The last few moments or so, we've heard some loud bangs here as well on the very entrance of the Strait of Hormuz. And as I mentioned, there are still around 1,000 ships sat waiting, anchored down to head into this very strategic waterway, 200 of them, oil tankers still struggling to get through. Currently, the only oil that is passing through the Strait of Hormuz is Iran's oil, going from the shores of Iran to China. And that's because effectively they have got control of these waters and they've got control of it militarily. We've seen that over the last few days because they've been targeting any tankers that try to pass through. We saw a German tanker off the coast of Dubai was targeted. We also saw that Thai flagged carrier in the north of Oman was struck by a Iranian ballistic missile. We've got an update about that this evening, suggesting that the 3 crew members that were missing still remain missing at sea, and there is a suggestion that they now may have died as a result. Katie, tonight I've spoken to some seafarers on the Strait of Hormuz behind me. They said to me specifically that they are scared, that they're frightened of being sitting ducks, and they feel pressured to get moving. Right now, this feels like the situation will remain for some time because there is no obvious solution to getting ships moving in the Strait of Hormuz. We heard yesterday from the new Supreme Leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. Well, we didn't hear directly from him, but of course his speech and his words apparently. And he said that he will keep the Strait of Hormuz shut because he wants to keep that pressure on Israel and the US. It's my understanding tonight that there is pressure on the US, and Wilfred will be able to talk a bit more about that because Pete Hegseth had brushed it off in his daily briefing today, saying there's nothing to worry about here on the Strait of Hormuz. But Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, saying in that interview that it would happen, they would get military vessels out here to get ships moving as soon as possible. In stark contrast, though, the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, had said that the US isn't ready to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So who's on the same page? That's a big question. Just one more point as well, Katie, on the point of mines. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did say today that there isn't clear evidence that there are mines in the water right now. But I've spoken to a number of analysts today who've suggested that over the last 48 hours, they've seen evidence of small Iranian boats traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, boats that are able to deposit these mines in these waters. If they have done that, this would be a worst case scenario for boats wanting to try and get through. It would be the worst case scenario as well for the oil markets. And basically, it would mean that only Iran knows exactly what are the safe routes throughout the Strait of Hormuz. We are now 2 weeks into this conflict. It's been destructive. It's been bloody. It's also had huge impact across this region. But it's in the waters behind me, Katie, where the world is feeling the impact. And day by day, as it remains shut, that just gets worse.
Yeah, and there's so much there. I want to get to a lot of it with Barbara, but also some of it with Wilfred. Wilfred, I'll start with you. Let's talk about the claims that the U.S. will be able. What is Scott Bessent saying about the U.S. being able to escort ships through that waterway?
I think with that, you've got to kind of reflect on the clip you already played, which is the moment of the interview came immediately after he'd returned from the Situation Room at around lunchtime, just before lunchtime, Eastern time yesterday. It came up about how they're going to be easing the oil prices and getting more ships through the Straits of Hormuz fresh after he'd come back. So I pressed him on that. I said, is this something you've just been discussing? Because clearly it would be more relevant perhaps for the Defence Secretary than it would be the Treasury Secretary, unless he'd just been in the room where it was discussed. He said explicitly that the waterway hadn't been mined and that some ships were getting through. And he said quite clearly, implicitly, that the Navy was getting ready to escort ships, possibly with coalition forces to help. All the reporting from military experts, from reporters like INZI there in the region, does suggest that that is quite some way off. But I think it had added weight and relevance because it came from a cabinet member who'd just been in the Situation Room with the president. The other thing I'd just quickly say on all of this is clearly 2 days after the announcement of big SPR oil, Strategic Petroleum Reserves releases, the oil price hasn't calmed down. And I think what we're seeing, the Treasury Secretary being drawn into the Situation Room with these military moments because they're trying to explore other ways to get it down. And as you mentioned earlier, we saw the relaxation of sanctions on Russian vessels carrying oil as well late last night, which is no doubt a further step with that in mind.
Let me play that moment where you're asking Secretary Bessent about the Russian oil and Russia benefiting financially from this war when so much effort has been put into the West trying to curb Russia's financial abilities in the war that they are waging on Ukraine. There have been a lot of sanctions from the U.S. and from European nations to try to put Russia on its heels, and that is being loosened today. Here's what Scott Bessent told you.
Is it a matter of regret to you that Russia is benefiting from this conflict?
Well, I think it's an inevitability, and that's why we gave a 30-day waiver, because the Russian barrels are on the water, and it is a quick source of for the Indian refineries. The other way to think about it is those barrels are going to end up in China anyway.
But is it a shame that Russia benefits?
Again, that it is unfortunate, and we hope that it will be in a micro period that they will benefit.
It makes you ask the question, which has been asked multiple times, Wilfred, was there not planning ahead of this? Did they not foresee the Strait being a problem if Donald Trump chose to attack Iran?
Again, I think that's clearly a question lots of people are asking. I think from my conversation yesterday, which was an extended 50-minute, wide-ranging conversation with the U.S. Treasury Secretary, what I think became clear is that they are very concerned about the elevated oil price, but they're not willing to back down on the military action in Iran in order to reach that. They are very much committed to the military action, and therefore they are exploring these other possible measures that could try and ease the oil price. I think you do have to look, even though the Treasury Secretary there said that it was unfortunate that Russia was benefiting from this, that there's a hierarchy of objectives there. Maintaining their military action in Iran comes top, easing the oil price pressures comes second, and looking after Ukraine comes somewhere distant behind that. And as you said, that's clearly upset a lot of European partners. I do think, though, that scale of commitment, I asked him, is there a number, is there a cost that would make you go and tell the president we can't afford this? And he said unequivocally not. We did also talk more broadly from his investment career and his move into policymaking, as opposed to specifically about Iran, about the markets that are most important. And he said very clearly the bond market. So I'm keeping an eye on that. Yields are up a bit today, whereas the oil market hasn't been enough to make the administration question whether they're doing the right thing or whether the price is too high. I wonder if the bond market moving might change that.
Well, I mean, Americans are feeling it financially, both in every time they fill up their gas tank, but they're going to feel it soon at the grocery store as well as fertilizer gets choked off. All right, so Barbara, let's talk about the moves that are being made by the Pentagon to try to get control of the Strait. Pete Hegseth today said, "Don't worry about it; it's all under control." What action is behind that confidence?
Well, there's been some reporting in the last couple of hours, Katie, that several hundred Marines out of Asia, Japan, are going to be headed on amphibious ships towards the Persian Gulf. Not at all clear what their exact mission will be. It'll take them a couple of weeks to get there. Could they do escort duty? Perhaps, but not clear how escort duty would actually work, because in order to fully escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz, presumably you have to get inside the strait and escort them out. And there's no indication Iran would permit that. So maybe this is some kind of standoff escort. I'm not sure that will satisfy insurance markets as much as quite clearly these civilian mariners want to get out of there and get to safe ground. Hegseth was extraordinary today in his analysis of it. His comment is, I would say, getting play around the world, because he says essentially that there's no problem. He says the strait is open if it wasn't for the fact Iran is shooting at these cargo ships. And if they're not shooting, they can go through. It's a comment that's really hard to fathom. At the same time, he also was just very adamant today about maintaining his very, shall we say, very aggressive attitude towards the campaign. He said that the U.S. would give no quarter to enemy forces, and that got a lot of attention because that is a war crime. The countries that obey international law do not give no quarter to enemy forces. There is mercy, there is arrest, there is detention. So Hegseth getting attention for what he's saying, presumably trying to satisfy President Trump, trying to satisfy the White House, but causing a lot of consternation.
There are growing concerns that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is trying to gut legal oversight of the Trump administration's conduct at a time of war. In a video posted this week, Hegseth ordered a complete overhaul of how the military's lawyers in uniform, known as JAG officers, and their civilian counterparts are organized. Hegseth claimed that the review is part of an effort to, quote, reduce waste. But The Atlantic reports this, quote, his plans have alarmed many current and former military lawyers who see the bureaucratic justifications as cover for what they suspect Hegseth really wants to do: reduce the ranks of lawyers, purge internal dissent, and eliminate guardrails designed to restrict the military from carrying out legally dubious orders. I want to bring in staff writer for The Atlantic, Missy Ryan, who's bylined on that reporting. Also joining us, Margaret Donovan. She served as a captain in the Army, serving in the 101st Airborne Division and later in 5th Special Forces Group. She was captain in the JAG Corps and is the former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Connecticut. She's now a visiting lecturer at Yale Law. Let me start with you, Missy Ryan, and just ask you to take us through the reporting.
Sure. So Hegseth this week, as you said, released this video where he talks about a big reform to the JAG Corps. His stated purpose is to increase effectiveness and sort of sharpen the legal edge, as he calls it, in order to sharpen the warfighter edge. And it's part of his desire to boost lethality, as he calls it, in the U.S. military. But and on the face of it, the actions that he's talking about, sort of reallocating legal duties between the uniform JAG Corps and then the civilian lawyers in the Defense Department, seem fairly benign or anodyne, but really they need to be looked at in the context of Hegseth's long-standing hostility towards military lawyers, who he has repeatedly said sort of represent impediments to the kind of bare-knuckle lethality that he thinks the U.S. military should bring to any conflict. He has used kind of crude terminology to refer to the JAGs. One of the first things he did when he came into office last year was to fire the top, some of the military's top lawyers, saying that they represented roadblocks to the president's agenda. And since then, as your viewers will know, there's been a series of actions that he's taken that have kind of raised the questions about the legality of what he's doing with the Pentagon, including the boat strikes in the Caribbean, now going to war with Iran without any sort of congressional approval, as the Constitution requires. And so I think there's a lot of suspicion and fear among the military lawyers that we spoke with that this is another part of that trajectory and something that could further weaken the legal grounding of the operations that the military undertakes every day.
What is a single example of a military operation that was inadequately lethal, Missy?
I think that, the question you're asking is being answered on the flip side in Iran. There's been more than 6,000 targets hit. And, I don't think that there has been, in terms of tactics, there isn't really a problem that needs to be solved here that I'm aware of. This is more about, I think, Hegseth having a kind of an axe to grind with any sort of what he would view as an unnecessary battlefield constraint. And that could include what he's referred to as stupid rules of engagement. That could refer to as lawyers who he kind of depicts as, pencil-necked naysayers who are going to stand in the way of the operators and impede their ability to go after their targets and defend themselves. And so this really does need to be viewed in that way, that he's shown already a willingness to fire people that he doesn't feel like are sufficiently loyal to his approach and to the president. And then potentially, the bigger picture here is weaken the institution and the 3 million men and women under his command in the Defense Department.
On the 14th day of Donald Trump's war of choice in Iran, the death toll for U.S. service members now stands at 13. The Pentagon confirmed that all 6 crew members of a U.S. refueling aircraft died when it crashed in Iraq yesterday, adding, quote, the circumstances of the incident are under investigation. However, the loss of the aircraft was not due to hostile fire or friendly fire. It is worth noting that 13 service members were killed in the Abbey Gate attack in Afghanistan in 2021, when President Biden was executing the withdrawal deal that Donald Trump made with the Taliban. But Donald Trump relentlessly attacked his predecessor for 13 dead for the last 5 years, including, again, this past Wednesday.
Everything they did was wrong. Think of it. Afghanistan, Biden, Afghanistan, the most embarrassing day in the history of our country. Embarrassing. 13 dead.
13 dead. Today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth responded to the rising death toll with, quote, bad things can happen.
War is hell. War is chaos. And as we saw yesterday with the tragic crash of our KC-135 tanker, bad things can happen.
It's an unusual way to say things, but the ex-Fox and Friends weekend host is making headlines for this truly unbelievable comment that he made today.
Or more fake news from CNN. Reports that the Trump administration underestimated the Iran war's impact on the Strait of Hormuz. Patently ridiculous, of course. For decades, Iran has threatened shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. This is always what they do, hold the strait hostage. CNN doesn't think we thought of that. It's a fundamentally unserious report. The sooner David Ellison takes over that network, the better.
He can't wait for the Trump-friendly billionaire David Ellison to buy a news network so he won't have to deal with tough reporting. Hegseth apparently thinks press coverage should be like the meme videos that the White House has been pumping out. Hegseth clearly doesn't understand that it is his duty to answer questions from the press and that Americans deserve truthful and full answers about a war being waged in their name, a war that has cost American lives. And of course, Hegseth also appears to have been lying. The CNN report, which has since been confirmed by MS Now, cited multiple officials with knowledge of the Pentagon and National Security Council's planning of the military operation in Iraq, which underestimated Iran's willingness to close the strait as a retaliation for U.S. military action, according to the sources. The warnings were there. The Trump administration just chose to ignore them in what has turned out to be a brazenly stupid mistake. Global energy prices have skyrocketed as Iran has closed off the Strait of Hormuz. A New York Times analysis finds at least 16 oil tankers, cargo, and other commercial ships have been attacked in the Persian Gulf since the war began. That includes 6 in just 2 days. Trump's energy secretary just said yesterday that the U.S. Navy is not ready to try to escort oil tankers through the strait, despite false claims that it already had this week. Still, Pete Hegseth said this.
They are exercising sheer desperation in the Straits of Hormuz. Something we're dealing with. We have been dealing with it and don't need to worry about it.
Don't need to worry about it. Did he just tell the American people not to worry about gas prices rising to $3.63 per gallon on average, nearly 22% higher than they were 2 weeks ago? The New York Times reports, quote, the world's benchmark for oil finished the day above $103 a barrel. That is up more than 40% since the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran began almost 2 weeks ago. And now Donald Trump is helping out his old pal Vladimir Putin by temporarily lifting sanctions on Russian oil because of its invasion in Ukraine. The Washington Post reports the move is going to provide a huge financial boost to Russia, which experts say has already been receiving about $150 million per day from increased oil sales since the U.S. attacked Iran 2 weeks ago. The former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, tells us another way that Vladimir Putin benefits from Donald Trump's war of choice.
Before, in 2022, the United States and the free world had the moral high ground in denouncing Putin's invasion of Ukraine as illegitimate, unprovoked, and the rest of the world rallied behind that cause. Now that Trump has launched his own illegal war that was not preempted by an imminent threat to the United States, we lose that moral high ground. It looks like we're just like them. Now, I personally don't believe that. Putin runs a brutal dictatorship, attacking a democracy in Ukraine. We have gone to war against a brutal dictatorship that has threatened American lives, killed Americans, and other people in the region. But I'm not sure I could win that argument in Delhi or Johannesburg or Jakarta, because that's not the right way the rest of the world sees us. And that makes Putin's war look more legitimate than it should be. And this is another unintended negative consequence of this war for us, but it's a positive for Vladimir Putin.
Pete Hegseth dodged questions about preliminary reports this week by the Pentagon that determined that the U.S. was responsible for a strike on the Iranian girls' school that killed 175 people, mostly children, perhaps due to outdated targeting information. But Pete Hegseth had no qualms about saying this.
And we know they know that the military capabilities of their evil regime are crumbling. We will keep pressing. We will keep pushing, keep advancing. No quarter, no mercy for our enemy.
Democratic Congressman Eugene Vindman, our first guest tonight, posted this in response, saying, quote, former Army JAG here, no quarter orders are a violation of the law of war and Geneva Conventions. This is the same order reportedly given during the Caribbean boat strikes. Secretary Hegseth is establishing a pattern of issuing illegal orders. I've trained hundreds of soldiers on the law of war. Our service members have an obligation to follow that law. The New York Times reports, quote, about 2,500 Marines aboard as many as 3 warships are headed to the Middle East from the Indo-Pacific region as Iran increases its attacks on the Strait of Hormuz, 2 officials said. The Marines will join more than 50,000 American troops in the region. It was unclear how the new deployment would be used. In more proof that Donald Trump has no idea what he's doing with this war in Iran or how or when to get out of it, Axios reports, quote, President Trump told G7 leaders in a virtual meeting Wednesday that Iran is, quote, about to surrender, end quote, according to 3 officials from G7 countries briefed on the contents of the call. 24 hours later, Iran's new supreme leader issued his first public statement vowing to keep fighting. So today, Donald Trump said this.
I don't think it's going to be long. When it's over, this is going to bounce right back so fast.
When are you going to know when it's over?
When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
When I feel it in my bones. Tell that to the families of the now 13 dead U.S. service members in just the first 2 weeks of a war that Donald Trump claims will end when he feels it in his bones. Tell it to the families whose loved ones are in harm's way tonight. Just wait for the commander-in-chief who avoided military service because of alleged bone spurs to feel the end of this war in his bones. The New York Times reports, quote, inside the administration, some officials are growing pessimistic about the lack of a clear strategy to finish the war, but they've been careful not to express that directly to the president, who's repeatedly declared that the military operation is a complete success. But that lack of a clear strategy to finish the war did not stop the Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson from falling right in line.
The president has said in the last, 12 hours that he expects the operation in Iran to come to a close soon. The mission is virtually accomplished now, as it was defined, and I think that'll happen.
The mission is virtually accomplished now, as it was defined. The stated goals for this war of choice have changed countless times, as has the number of times Donald Trump has said Iran is decimated, or there's nothing left to target, and it should end soon. Yet he needs unconditional surrender. Or today, when he said it's over, or that it'll be over when he feels it in his bones. This is not a war with a goal. And Republicans are just telling Donald Trump what he wants to hear. But that grows more dangerous by the day, considering both the human toll and the economic toll. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you tonight, Ali.
I want to just talk about this no quarter business, because it is becoming increasingly evident, separate and apart from the legitimacy of this war, that Pete Hegseth is in over his skis. It is absolutely illegal to say no quarter. It's just not a thing. Explain that to those of us who are civilians.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually in black and white in international law. So under the Geneva Convention, under the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, the very order, no quarter will be given, that's a violation. It's plain and simple. And I've trained hundreds, conservatively, probably thousands of soldiers on the law of war. And everybody, even privates, know that that's illegal. And now this is a pattern from Pete Hegseth. This administration, they learn by trial and error. They have no experience, no knowledge, no judgment. It's actually painful to watch the cavalier attitude to American casualties from the president and the secretary. It's obscene. And here we are. The president starts an unlawful war of choice with Iran. Iran gets intel from Russia to target Americans, and the president lifts sanctions on Russian oil to help Russia. The president is just really bad at his job, and these actions are getting American service members killed.
Let's talk about that last point. Russia, because it's been sanctioned for so long, since the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine in 2013 and then subsequently, gets most of its foreign currency from the sale of oil. That is its most valuable thing that it can sell the world. And America had met with some degree of success in trying to limit that. What a wild thing that we've removed those sanctions because we have done something that has caused Iran to then close the Strait of Hormuz, which, by the way, you need to be no expert on the Strait of Hormuz. You need to look at a simple map and understand, boy, that's a dangerous thing to do.
Absolutely. Look, these things are very foreseeable. There's a reason why Democratic and Republican administrations over the course of decades have decided not to engage in a conflict with Iran. 20% of oil transits the Strait of Hormuz. We have a number of bases in the region. We have a number of allies. And all of the calculations have been that it's not worth the massive disruption, the potential cost and life. I mean, this regime, despite what the administration is saying, is not on the verge of folding. I mean, I've seen no indication of that. In fact, the president and this administration have gone to war with Iran based purely on hope that American air power is sufficient to bring the Iranians to their knees, and hope that the Iranian people rise up. And I'll tell you, in the last 2 weeks or so, the prospects of the Iranian people rising up against the regime have faded, not grown.
Yeah, and by the way, attacking a refinery in Tehran, I mean, there are a lot of people in Iran who very validly hate their regime and would like to see it overthrown. But when they're getting killed, and this doesn't help you win hearts and minds. Absolutely.
This president promised that he would not get us involved in another Middle East war, a forever war. We have no real prospects of when this will end because we don't know what the objectives are. The president, from one moment he's saying unconditional surrender. The next moment he's talking about eliminating a nuclear capability that he obliterated just 8 months ago. So he was either lying then or he's lying now. And all at the same time that costs are skyrocketing for Americans. He got elected because he claimed he was going to lower costs. Instead, he is doing everything he can to skyrocket costs. It's obscene, and the cost in American blood and treasure is real. I saw that at Dover last weekend when I was at the at the transfer of American dead, literally feet behind the president, watching the coffins roll by and wondering to myself, when will this end?
Okay, today is the 14th day of Trump's war of choice with Iran. And the Secretary of Defense, as I was just talking about with Chris, and if you didn't see this, boy, held not one, but really two press conferences. And within the first 5 minutes of one of taking that microphone, he made very clear what his priorities are.
Some in this crew, in the press, just can't stop. Allow me to make a few suggestions. People look up at the TV and they see banners, they see headlines. For example, a banner or a headline, Mideast war intensifies. What should the banner read instead? How about Iran increasingly desperate? Or more fake news from CNN. Reports that the Trump administration underestimated the Iran war's impact on the Strait of Hormuz. Patently ridiculous. CNN doesn't think we thought of that. It's a fundamentally unserious report. The sooner David Ellison takes over that network, the better.
Okay, I just have to note, he was reading that from a piece of paper. It wasn't him just spouting off. Somebody wrote that for him. He wrote it for himself. He agreed to read that. I would just note. I mean, and that, I think, tells us what Pete Hegseth thought was a priority today. Criticizing headlines and cable news banners he saw about the war, telling people how he would have written those headlines instead. And he's gloating that the Trump-aligned billionaire who's set to take over CNN will sanitize the network's coverage to make it align with the administration's PR agenda. That is, of course, the reference to the Ellisons there. This press conference was held on the morning we learned that 6 more service members were killed in Trump's war with Iran when their plane crashed over Iraq last night. Pete Hegseth stood at that microphone for almost 9 minutes before even mentioning those fallen service members. But he was sure to get right to his media criticism near the very top of his remarks. In fact, take a look at the way Hegseth reacted when he was asked a very specific and predictable question about U.S. casualties.
How many American casualties have there been, and where were the American service members when they were injured?
I mean, it's a bunch of return to duty. So we've had the large majority have gone in for some medical treatment and return to duty.
You catch that there? I mean, I showed you part of what he said in the beginning of the press conference. He seemed, though, pretty unprepared for a predictable question on American casualties, which is the most important question right now, how this war is impacting the men and women serving our country. But he had plenty to say about the media's coverage of the war. And what was, again, about that coverage that so offended Hegseth? What exactly did he take issue with?
For example, a banner or a headline, Mideast war intensifies. What should the banner read instead? How about Iran increasingly desperate?
He's literally talking about what you see on the bottom of your screen. Hegseth lashes out at the media over war coverage. Accurate banner, by the way. That's what he's talking about. But how dare the press? How dare they write a banner or a headline as blatantly biased as Mideast war intensifies? They should talk about how desperate Iran is instead. That's the point he made. Takes some real liberal media spin to use a word like intensify to describe this war, doesn't it? Well, here's a headline written 3 days ago that appeared on the website of Pete Hegseth's own department. Quote, Hegseth says U.S. attacks intensify under epic fury. And I wish that was the most asinine thing that Pete Hegseth said this morning while addressing this war, but it's not. In that same chest-thumping press conference, Hegseth also gave an update on the Strait of Hormuz, the vital waterway that 20% of the world's oil shipments pass through, which Iran has effectively shut down during this war. Well, the Secretary of Defense echoed this rather profound observation about that situation today.
The only thing prohibiting transit in the Straits right now is Iran shooting at shipping. It is open for transit should Iran not do that.
So just to kind of summarize that. So there's a good chance your ship may blow up from Iranian missiles, mines, or drones. But hey, other than that, the Strait is totally open. Everything's all good. Thanks for that crack analysis there, Pete. Look, a lot of what Hegseth had to offer today was insane and ridiculous and offensive at times, but perhaps the wildest thing was this.
We will keep pressing. We will keep pushing, keep advancing. No quarter, no mercy for our enemies.
Now, no quarter, no mercy for our enemies, what he just said. I'm sure Pete Hegseth thought that line made him sound like some kind of a real badass. I mean, perhaps it was another one he practiced with a hairbrush in front of a mirror just to see how tough he looked. But unfortunately for him, it might also be a war crime. I mean, because declaring no quarter is essentially saying that you will not allow your enemy to surrender on the battlefield. Now, this is from the 1907 Hague Convention, a treaty the U.S. has been a party to for over 100 years. Here's what it says, quote, "It is especially forbidden to declare that no quarter will be given." But hey, I mean, maybe all that international law stuff doesn't float your boat. That's okay. Maybe you're more of an America First kind of guy or gal. That's fine, too. Well, the U.S. military's own Manual of Military Commissions has a whole section prohibiting anyone with command or control over troops from declaring that they should give no quarter, an infraction that carries a maximum penalty of life in prison. And look, you could say that maybe this was a slip of the tongue from our Secretary of Defense, a reflection of inexperience, who knows? But remember that Pete Hegseth is on the record opposing the Geneva Conventions. He's moved to fire or reassign many of the military lawyers tasked with making sure the U.S. military follows the laws of war. And just yesterday, The Atlantic reported that Hegseth has proposed a ruthless overhaul of how those thousands of lawyers operate under his command. Hegseth has also refused to publicly release the video of an alleged double tap strike in the Caribbean, which some military lawyers say violated the laws of war. And he has personally targeted members of Congress for telling service members not to follow illegal orders like, say, giving no quarter to your enemies. So I don't know that Pete Hegseth has really earned the benefit of the doubt on this one. I really don't think he has. It's also extremely concerning to have someone like Pete Hegseth running the Defense Department right now, because despite what Pete Hegseth may want us to say, this war does seem to be intensifying. I mean, we can see that with our own eyes and from excellent reporting out there. And of course, it's not just Hegseth's decision-making here that's so concerning. It's also the commander-in-chief, who's currently weighing boots on the ground. Now, Nemes can now report that the U.S. is now moving a Marine Expeditionary Unit with 5,000 Marines into the region. And that's a unit that typically includes ground combat troops. And while having one in the region doesn't necessarily mean we will put those boots on the ground in Iran, that those men and women will serve on the ground in Iran, it often is the first step toward that kind of an action. So it is something worth raising and worth talking about. Marine Expeditionary Units were how the first ground troops deployed to Vietnam. They were the earliest combat troops to be sent into that war, kicking off the slippery slope of deployments that characterized the next 9 years of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. You know, Vietnam, the war that Trump got out of by claiming to have a bone spur in his foot. Seems Trump has now he's come full circle, because today he actually has said that this current war, the one he started, will end when he, quote, feels it in his bones.
When are you going to know when it's over?
When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
Donald Trump's bones, making all his military decisions for him since 1968. How good should we feel about that? And it turns out that Trump's bones may be just about the only thing he is listening to right now.
What are the dynamics when you have a big decision like Iran or Venezuela? Are people speaking up and speaking their minds, even if...
I let them speak their mind, and they do. And we have some differences, but they never end up being much. I convince them all to let's do it my way.
People speak up. He lets them. How kind of you. All the military commanders with decades of experience. They speak their minds, and then, well, Trump convinces them all to do it his way, that by his telling at least. That is the way major decisions in this war seem to be being made, according to Trump's whims. At least 13 service members have died. We've lost access to a major shipping route for critical goods like oil and fertilizer. We've moved military resources out of strategic positions. We've limited our ability to help allies like Ukraine. And for what?